Ever watch a political clip and feel your brain do that? Wait, did they actually say that? Because that's the new game. The video doesn't have to be real, it just has to hit the right nerves. Identity, belonging, that old reflex that says, if they're coming from my group, I better pick a side. Today, we're talking about an AI deepfake in the Texas Senate race and what it reveals about the country right now. Not just misinformation, but loyalty tests. Welcome to Shrink the Nation. Let's go.
This is Shrink the Nation, a podcast for thoughtful, informed adults, preferably holding a drink and definitely holding a thought. The views expressed here are ours alone. They do not represent our employers, institutions, licensing boards, government agencies, bourbon distilleries, or most emphatically, our families. They've been very clear about that. This show is for education and entertainment only. Nothing you hear is medical, psychiatric, legal, or professional advice. We're clinicians, not your clinicians. If something we say stirs you up, that's not a crisis, that's a journal entry, or an email sent politely. We're here to challenge ideas, not diagnose strangers on the internet. And if you are in real distress, please reach out to a professional who can actually help you.
Hey, I'm David. I have 20 plus military and I am a board certified psychiatrist. Today, my pour is a nice Colombian blend from, I have no idea where it's from actually, but it's coffee. It's coffee. It's early in the morning. I'd
It
like
is.
to maintain my family sense that I don't just sit in the garage and drink.
Yeah. Hey, and it's Rob, 30 in the military and 26 in psychiatry, board certified. My pour today is actually nothing. I don't even have coffee right now. Early enough and late enough that I've already drank coffee and I'm in that zone. So let's do this.
Right. We've had a lengthy discussion already this morning about nothing that we're going to talk about. One of the things that jumped out at me as I was doing some research for the show, Robbie, is something that we kind of talked about before as being a possibility, but now it's happening. And I think it's actually ripe for discussion. But there's a video for the Texas Senate race. Democratic Texas State Representative James Tallarico is standing in front of a Texas flag, just beaming. And he says, radicalized white men are the greatest domestic terrorist threat in our country. And then a voice whispers, white men. And he continues, so true, so true. So this is a video that's been going around social media. It's a legit campaign video. It was paid for and created by the National Republican Senatorial Committee. And you would think, James, maybe don't say those kinds of things in the public sphere, especially on camera, especially with the Texas flag behind you. I mean, that probably doesn't look too great. Well, as it turns out, Robbie, it is an AI deepfake that was generated by the National Republican Senatorial Committee. And at the bottom corner, there's a little note that says it was generated by AI. Now, it's actually based off of a social media post that he wrote years ago. But we had spoken about how AI was able to convince people to change their vote. That was chatbots. I guess what I didn't think about, or probably should have, was that it would be weaponized. And we thought within the next cycle or whatever, this would start to happen. Well, we didn't really think about the fact that there would be actual deep fakes made by the opposition of the candidate they're going against making certain statements. And holy shit, Rob, that's a interesting premise.
I guess psychologically, where we have found ourselves is targeting white men conveys a certain thing that they're shooting for. I do find it fascinating at this point that white men somehow feel vulnerable, and they do. And we've talked about this. I can go back over the last year of us doing this. And we've talked about this many, many times that white men feel vulnerable. I guess what is surprising to me is that we're still at a point where that conveys some power. There's a message in that. Hey, white guys, you're at risk.
I'm still concerned or dumbstruck by the brazenness to create a deep fake of your competitor and put words in their mouth that didn't happen. He did use social media to say the first part, but then the extra context being added in isn't necessarily correct. And I know that campaigns have used videos of their opponents saying the things they said, but when you're creating the video, right, like you're creating the imagery, you're not just use a social media post. But to add the extra context, it does potentially change it. Now, on your part, just to be aware, here are the statistics. 89% of domestic terrorism is conducted by males. 78.1% of them are white with a median age of 30 at the time of the attack. So it's not wrong. It's not incorrect. That is the demographic that is most likely to conduct domestic terrorism in the United States, which makes a ton of sense because we have more white people than we have non-white people. So just that tracks. And of course it does.
It does, but, probability is the thing that gets lost on the internet very often, that we're still talking about a low probability event. They happen frequently, but, I mean, it reminds me of folks who, go to Google to say, stomach pain, and Google's really great at giving you possibilities. It's not great at giving you probabilities, and the probability of a white male doing something like this is pretty low. That as a white male, the probability that I'm going to conduct a terrorist event is virtually zero.
I
And
mean, I feel like you actually probably are higher risk factor than most. Knowing you personally, I'd say your risk factors might be a little bit higher than the average bear. But yes, the probability is still low. Now, but here's the thing.
okay.
If we break down what was said, which was, and I think this is where hearing it said does make it sound worse about what was said. And
Yeah.
this is the genius or terrifying deviance of creating a video. Because what the quote is, radicalized white men are the greatest domestic terrorist threat in our country.
Hmm.
And that is factually correct. If
Yes.
the question was, what demographic is most likely to commit domestic terrorism in the United States? The answer is white men. Now, the word radicalized that might be questionable. I don't know the data, but white men are the greatest domestic terrorist threat in our country. That is true. It is factually correct because the data shows that white males are the ones who have conducted domestic terrorism the most in the United States. Now, what you hear, I think, when you see that is that radicalized white men committing domestic terrorism is the greatest threat to our country, which is not correct and wasn't even said. But I think that's what you hear when you hear it. When you have the ability to read it and read it closely, you understand that that's a factual statement. Adding in the somebody whispering white men and then having him agree with that, which never happened, right? Like, which is not true. Or if it was, my guess is his social media statement said part of that. And then maybe there were comments within comments that maybe he replied to or something. I don't know, where maybe that's where they're taking the quotes from. But you see, the problem here is that you're creating it like this was something that he put on video to say, and then you're hearing something different. Truth or not, it's doesn't matter to us so much psychologically. Holy shit, how fucking powerful. How powerful. Because even as you were talking, I was thinking, God, did he say that? Did he say it the way that I just and I had to
Why?
go back and look at it. And the answer is no, he didn't. He said the facts. He didn't say that this is the greatest threat because even I thought that's kind of crazy.
Why are white men so fragile? Because that's really what we're talking about here, is that they've identified a certain fragility in the identity of white men, and they're attacking that. And it's not an effort to like, hey, this is our policy. This is what we believe in. This is what we want. No, it is an effort to make white men, you and I, and
Don't
our
talk.
ilk.
I'm a beautiful 24-year-old
Yeah.
woman. You know that as you're you. So we're
I
not
can tell I can tell by your voice.
exactly. I look
It's
like Jessica
yeah,
Foster
yeah, you do.
and you look like a young Barbara Eden.
Oh my gosh, yes.
That deep throaty laugh of yours, Barbara.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But psychologically, why are white men so fragile right now?
That's a good question. I don't know that all white men are fragile. I do think that if you are living in a country that has been actively trying to undo generations of inequity, and that has been changing. Now, it's been changing not just through actions of the government. I mean, there was affirmative action. There's been obviously DEI things. I think recently there was a push by the Attorney General of Florida to have the NFL stop using the Rooney Rule within the state of Florida. And the Rooney Rule requires that at least two people of color are included in coaching search hires. So when you're looking at those things, that's a piece of it. But what I look at goes deeper than that because it's not just a system, especially from a governmental perspective, that's been trying to skew back towards everybody. It was that women and people of color and women of color, to be included in that, have been making active attempts to become more educated, more capable, have better resumes, and they become more competitive in the workplace because they had to. In order for them to be considered for certain jobs, they had to be more qualified. I think the data shows that women won't even apply for a job until they're fully qualified for it, whereas men will apply for jobs that they're only partially qualified for and try to pick up the slack. But that's been a cultural shift for decades. And now we're seeing the outcome of that, which is that being a white man is not enough to be qualified for certain things. And I think that hurts when you grew up in a world where being a white man was all you really needed.
When I think about this, there's a couple of elements, and the obvious element is that we have achieved a technologic mark in which you can do such things. You can make these videos, you can do deep fakes that are so realistic that they're real for all intents and purposes. And if you're not really dialed in, you're not going to identify the fact they're fakes. They're completely generated fakes. That's one part of it. And that is a really significant,
Because we can.
yeah, that it's a really significant danger for us.
I think it goes beyond because we can. I think it's because the rules don't say we can't. And in politics, love, and war, it's win at all costs at this point.
There are no rules, there are no laws, there are no restrictions. So it's a possibility that we deal with every day. I mean, every time you're on TikTok, yeah, every time you're on Instagram, really every single thing you look at, you have to make a conscious decision to ask yourself, is this a fake? So that's part of it. And then part of it is we exist at a time in which the cultural dominance of white males is slipping. If you go just grab a white guy on the street and query him about what's going on. I don't necessarily think most males identify this, and they certainly can't step back and think about it in the bigger picture and the cultural flow and how societies work and how it moves from point A to point B. But what most white males probably feel at this juncture in a kind of a deep way is that they feel, and this is the challenge, they feel blamed for a history that's not really theirs. They didn't participate in it. They didn't do anything. They weren't slave owners.
And that's the argument that they make. And I get that. The only issue that I would take on this is that, yes, if the focus is on the slave owning and slavery, which hasn't been around for some time, I mean, it was around for way too long. If we're going to, well, I didn't own slaves, therefore I'm not benefiting from this system, that's bullshit. It's complete fucking
What
bullshit. Because the truth is, they have been benefiting for their entire lives. Being a white male now, you have absolutely benefited from the laws, the rules, the way that the laws were written. You have benefited because if you've been pulled over and you weren't concerned that you might die in this interaction,
you wouldn't know that.
it's because you're a white male. No, and I get that you wouldn't know that, but the thing is, and I think the ad is targeted towards a demographic. It isn't targeted towards white males. It's targeted towards older white males. And older white males absolutely lived in a world where you could slap your secretary on the ass and that was considered just bad. That's what guys do. But that's not the world we
Wait,
live in now.
I I
I know. I'm
I
sorry to break this to you, Rob.
I need to refrain from this.
You can't slap your secretary on his ass no matter how good he looks, okay, Rob? But the thing is,
Well,
that's the demographic. And the truth is,
I'm gonna
as
apologize to Donnie tomorrow. I'm
as
like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Donnie.
Eduardo, it's Eduardo.
Eduardo.
He just wears
Nah,
those tight jeans. And
I
why is he wearing
refuse to
jeans?
allow him.
It's not even Friday. Why
He's
is he
not allowed to call himself
casual?
Eduardo. He's Donnie.
It's Eddie. As I get older, as the white men that I grew up with get older as well, I actually see this. They start to get frustrated because the jokes that they tell aren't appropriate anymore. You can't say the things that you're saying, but they still will. And then they get upset. Why can't I say that? Why can't I talk about that? You built your entire identity, your entire professional life, your entire world on this perspective. And now it's being taken away. So I do see why they feel vulnerable.
My boys, I have a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old, soon to be 17. They are very sensitive to sexist language, to these kinds of jokes. They're super sensitive to it. And it strikes me. I consider myself reasonably sensitive to such things and reasonably thoughtful about such things. They will call me out on certain
Bet
things.
they do. I bet they do.
Yeah.
I have to edit your fucking speech on here sometimes, Robbie. I have to edit my own. But that's the thing is I have to edit my own because the world that we grew up in, it was okay to say certain things. And when things stop being okay and you don't understand it, and you're especially when you feel attacked when something is not okay, then of course you're going to not like it. You and I are psychiatrists, so we're used to being more empathic, being more sensitive towards other people's thoughts and beliefs. And yeah, we still have the rhetoric of the 80s, the 90s. We still do that, but we will also edit ourselves in real time. And then when it slips, I'll probably be embarrassed, like, oh, I didn't mean to say that. But
Mhm.
I'm not pissed, right? Like, and that's the emotional difference is that I might slip up and use a term that is definitely not okay now, but was definitely okay in the 90s. And I'm not mad that I can't say it because I understand the hurt. Because you and I have sat with thousands of people who have been traumatized and hurt by that kind of language. And we get it. We get why you can't say those things.
For the average white dude, if you look across the United States, and this reminds me of when I was in college, I took a synthesis class. In other words, you're supposed to, bring all your knowledge into this class. It was about race relations. And something that struck me in that class, because I was in a class with majority non-white individuals. And, I sat there and I listened to their perspectives and I listened to what they were saying. And it really struck me how there's a fundamental difference between perspectives that the average white guy that we're talking about, they live in homogeneous environments. They don't have much in the way of advantages to their mind. It's a homogeneous environment. It's a bunch of white guys. They are not benefited by being white from their perspective. Now, in the grand scheme of the United States, we can all say that they are benefited. There's an inherent benefit to being a white guy. But when you live in an environment where it's all white guys and you are competing against and participating with a bunch of white guys, it doesn't resonate. It doesn't feel right. It's not right. They are struggling to pay their bills. They're struggling to get jobs. They are struggling to take care of their families. And when you tell them you're benefited by this, it strikes them at a core level because they barely are getting by right now. And for you to tell them they have had a benefit by being white, their question is, where's the benefit?
I totally get that. My brain just went into this time travel forward mode, and I can just hear the people listening to this. And my guess is what they're yelling is so fucking what? Because what their thing is, just because somebody isolates themselves into a core demographic and doesn't see the benefit, it
They're not
doesn't mean that
isolated. They
they're
they
not.
grew up here. They
Well,
they live
but
here.
and they never
They
left
didn't
there,
make it, and
but they
didn't make
also
a choice. It's just like this is where I
well,
live.
that's not true. They did make a choice. They chose not to pursue higher education. But they also well, they did. They
David,
chose not to. No, they chose not
you
to because
you
everything we do is
elitist
a choice. Maybe, but everybody has a choice on what they do with their lives.
capability, buddy.
The fact is, one of the things that people in that position have done and have done for centuries is they've thought to themselves, well, at least I'm not black, right? Like, at least I'm not below this in their own mind because they know that if they were in a different demographic, it would probably be worse.
Mm-mm.
Maybe they don't consciously think that, but again, when was the last time you got pulled over and were thinking, shit, I may get shot by this cop.
So, growing up in an environment that is predominantly white, I would get pulled over because of the vehicle I was driving. Would get pulled over because of the clothes I was wearing. It's a different set of biases that exist in an environment that is homogeneous.
I can hear Allison screaming in the background. I can just hear her screaming.
And I get that. I get that. And but
Well,
this is
okay, I
what
guess.
we're dealing
Well,
with
and I
that
get no,
on
and I
a
get
wait,
that.
hang on. Shut your mouth for a moment. Just a moment.
What do you mean by you people, Robbie?
Yeah, you people. You, David. I mean, you. Referencing you. I realize that from a large scale perspective, that these things exist. There is no doubt in my mind that cultural bias and race bias exists. And there is no doubt in my mind that the nature of the United States and how we have developed that these things exist. What I'm saying is where the effectiveness of ads such as this exist is that there are these pockets, and they're relatively large pockets in the United States of homogeneous existence in which there's not a whole lot of people of color around you. What you're dealing with is in a day to day existence is a group of individuals who look very much like you, and you're struggling to exist. You are absolutely struggling to make it day to day, provide for your family, take care of them, make money, etc. And when you hear these things about cultural bias, they don't resonate because you are struggling. I mean, at a core level to make it. And when you say in the big scheme, and it's true that there is a bias out there and these things exist, but not in these little subculture environments. They don't exist. That finding a job, making enough money, providing for your kids, giving them birthday presents and Christmas presents, that has nothing to do. But interestingly enough, this dynamic that exists in the world that when you're told you are privileged, these people don't feel privileged, buddy. They just don't. They're not privileged. They've never been privileged. They were born into poverty. They work the best way they can. They've never been privileged. To be told that you're privileged doesn't resonate with them, and it makes them vulnerable to these kinds of ads.
It does make them vulnerable. This will be my last kind of dig at that, is that if you live in such a homogenous environment where it doesn't matter, I'm poor, I'm white, I'm struggling, somebody telling me that I'm privileged, which isn't what they're telling you. What they're telling you is that there is another group who has been actively pushed down, and that what is trying to be done is to remove those restrictions from those groups. It's not boosting them up. It's attempting to make it more even so that they have the same opportunities. Because in a hypothetical race, you have one group that is 3 laps ahead of the other and then told, okay, you need to finish at the same time. I get why they don't understand. However, the argument I think would be if their environment is so homogenous that it doesn't matter because they don't see themselves as having an advantage, then why does it piss them off so much when they just want to take away the restrictions from the other groups? Because if from that perspective, it doesn't matter. It's not going to hurt me because the other group doesn't exist here. Because in my world, there are no people of color who are going to come in and take over because they don't exist. Therefore, I'm not in an advantage point because they're not around me to show me the advantage. So why does it fucking matter if the restrictions are being pulled from them from other communities where they are being disadvantaged? And that's the argument I think they would make is like, you're not in the in group, but you're also not in the out group because the out group apparently doesn't exist for you. And so why are you holding it against these people who live elsewhere?
Psychologically, you're making very valid points.
It's because I'm right.
I think you're missing a really core.
I'm not missing it. What I'm doing is I am taking into consideration people who are disadvantaged because there are groups who are disadvantaged who, if they're hearing this, they're saying, so the fuck what?
I
Because
know.
we are actively being put at a disadvantage. Our country is 57.5% Caucasian, 13.7% Black,
Yum, yum.
20% Hispanic Latino, 1.4% American Indian, Alaskan Native, and 6.7% Asian. In our prisons at the end of 23, it was 33% Black, 31% white, 23% Hispanic, 2% American Indian, Alaska Native. So if you're in one of those demographics and you are being actively held back,
Right.
you don't care that there is a rural community of only white people who are pissed off that somebody is fighting for you. Nobody
David,
gives a shit.
that's why Donald Trump was elected, saying this doesn't matter. This isn't relevant. This isn't a thing. This shouldn't be a thing is missing the point. This is why he was elected, because these sub communities can't. They count a
Yeah.
great deal.
They count more, in fact. Why? Because the rules skew in their favor because the states are gerrymandered so much to make sure that their votes count more than the votes of the people who live in those urban communities. And that's a part of it.
What you're missing, because you're a massive dumbass. And I'm going out on a limb here to tell the audience, our tens of listeners, Dave's a massive dumbass. What you're missing is the core of being a human, is that until your core, your life is stable, until you have enough, until you can provide for your kids and you feel safe, you can't think on big scale. We've never been designed to think big scale. This is not a human thing. Why we have Donald Trump in the White House is because what really it comes down to is he made the argument to this population. He was going to help them provide for their families. And if we can help them provide for their families, then they can step back and they can think big picture. They will do it. As frustrating as people can be, they're not really that dumb. And they're not also that racist. They're just not. That if they are taken care of, if they can provide, then they will think about those sorts of things. And until they do, they can't. They just can't.
I agree with you on some parts. One, yes, people are not as stupid in general as is suggested. People are much smarter. I think having conversations with a lot of people, I've actually honestly been very surprised at
Yes,
how thoughtful and
me too.
intelligent people are on an individual level. I do worry sometimes that they are easy to manipulate.
Terribly.
The messaging from Donald Trump was, I'm going to take care of the poor white people. I think the
Mhm.
messaging from the Democrats was, we're going to take care of the poor people. The difference is that when you don't delineate the white versus color, people were hearing Donald Trump wants to take care of the poor white people, which is me. But he hasn't. He never intended to. He wasn't going to.
No, he never.
The One Big Beautiful Bill Act was the biggest movement of wealth from the poor to the wealthy.
Absolutely.
He's a billionaire. The guy doesn't give two shits about poor people.
Nor understand them. He doesn't have a clue.
Why would he? Where Democrats do fall short is they have the tendency to focus on the minority populations within that group.
And sub minority.
Their policies do benefit poor people, not just minorities, but the poorer population. So if anything, you'd question, why would somebody who has wealth want to vote for the Democrats who are going to try to distribute wealth more towards the poor population, which is the same argument. Why would poor people vote for somebody who's trying to distribute wealth away from them? They don't see it that way. They see it as them being protected as being white, but it's not about white on that front. It's about being poor.
Something Martin Luther King, who was usually remembered only for the singular race relations and the rights of people of color. That's what he's remembered for. But
Wait, what? I've never heard that.
yeah, I know. But if you actually go back to what he was saying, particularly in the latter phases of his time before he was assassinated, he actually shifted his perspective. It wasn't as focused on purely race, it was focused on poverty and the effect of poverty. And I'll tell you what poverty does: poverty makes racism, poverty creates racism. That when you are at the bottom, you will struggle to have any advantage. any friggin' advantage. The risk, this is absolutely in our wheelhouse here. This is psychological. When you are absolutely at the bottom, any kind of advantage, whether it be your skin color, the people you know, your family name, the fact that you know the mayor, whatever, you're going to grab those things. And Martin Luther King actually recognized that. He knew it. He understood it, that the greatest risk to racial equality was not just white and black, it was poverty. If you can solve the poverty problem, if you can give people equal opportunity, give them that opportunity to feel like I'm a man or a woman.
How about I'm an adult?
All right, I can provide for my children. I can make sure that they grow up safe. I can give them the things they need. I can give them a little bit extra, the special things that make them feel special. If you solve that, then all of a sudden, someone else's skin color doesn't count. It doesn't matter. You just don't give a shit. You don't give a shit if you can take care of your family and you feel like you are a effective adult.
To some
Yeah,
extent.
I mean, there's always those white powered douchebags that have like a political agenda and you whatever. Yeah, there's always going to be that subset. A vast majority of people, though, they don't fall into that. What they fall into is that when you say there's an advantage to being white, it threatens a subset of poor white people who are like, where's that advantage? My grandfather was poor. My parents were poor. I'm poor. I'm doing everything I can. There's very few options for me.
Yeah.
Where is my white advantage?
Yes, you're right.
I know I grew up in it.
As did I, but it's the difference between looking at the individual and then looking at the bigger picture.
It is.
And that's very much the difference. Now, when we go back to the AI deepfake of James Tallarico, even in his tweet or whatever social media he used, he didn't say white people are advantaged.
No.
What the Republican Senate, whatever the fuck committee did was they used his written words to create a video that implied that he believed that, which is not the Democratic side arguing that argument. It's the Republican side telling everybody that that's what Democrats believe.
Absolutely.
Now, it does play into psychology, and it is an effective tool to get people to vote in a certain direction. I mean, James Tallarico is a really interesting guy. He is he like a pastor? He's very Christian.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
He makes strong religious arguments in favor of the Democratic position, which is to try to reduce poverty and increase equality, which is the same argument that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was suggesting. He's a really interesting guy because if you are not a religious person, you might actually be kind of put off by what he says, yet he makes compelling Christian based arguments for the Democratic side, which is not what the Republicans do. But he definitely hasn't said, at least not in that tweet, he didn't say white men are privileged. He just stated the fact that white men are more likely to commit domestic terrorism.
Something personally that I guess I've always held is that one of the ways that the Democratic Party doesn't end up achieving, and at one time they did, they achieved a mass appeal based on, and it was really unions are what
Right.
gave the Democratic Party a predominance for a long time. And that was because they held a belief that the general public felt like, all right, this does benefit me. This is positive. And then we had, starting in the 80s, a general push away from populist benefit. And this is the American way, is that we all want to believe we can be wealthy. We all want to believe we can hit the jackpot, that the American dream of starting with nothing and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and achieving a wealth that is remarkable is a possibility. Everyone wants that. Everyone wants to believe that. Everyone, I don't care where you are in this country, I don't care how deep your poverty is, you want to believe you can come up with that idea, that thing, that whatever, and you can pull yourself up. The reality is that all of a sudden in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, there was this shift in which all of a sudden unions became bad things. They were a problem. They created additional hassles. They weren't necessary anymore. Businesses took care of their employees. The world just didn't require it anymore. Yeah, back in the early 1900s when businesses would work you to death and didn't give a shit about you, that's when they were necessary. Now they're just a problem. Now they're just something that sucks up money and they don't really serve a purpose any longer. It's unfortunate. And it's the nature of the cycles that societies go through, that we went from a society that was very pro union to a society that was anti union. And what we've achieved is an imbalance of wealth, a significant imbalance of wealth, in which most of the wealth lives with like 10 people in the United States that hold a vast majority of the wealth. And we're making a shift. And, I've talked about the book, The Storm Before the Calm, many, many times on our podcast. I still hold it dear because I hope it's true. And basically, it said that the 20s of right now, where we're living, was this confluence of both social change and economic change that creates chaos. And I think we all feel the chaos. But the book's prediction was that the 30s was going to be reorganization. And part of that reorganization was a shift of the voting population, that we are no longer going to vote based on race. We were going to vote based on economic status and what's best for us. Because for the last 20 years, maybe roughly, there's been a shift to this white identity voting that doesn't actually benefit these individuals.
No.
It's benefiting Elon Musk, it's benefiting very wealthy white people, but what it doesn't benefit is them individually, but their white identity leads them.
If you look at the distribution of wealth compared to the population demographics, it makes a ton of sense to go down the route of identity politics. Now, interestingly, it makes more sense to go down the route of identity politics if you're a Republican. It makes much more sense to
Absolutely.
go down the route of economic identity if you're a Democrat, because the top 1% of the population controls 31.7% of the wealth. The next 9% would be 36.4% of the wealth. Next 40% of the population controls 29.4% of the wealth. And the bottom 50% of the population controls 2.5% of the wealth. So the bottom 90% controls 31.9% of the wealth, and the top 10% controls 68.1%. The top 0.1% controls 14.4% of the wealth. If you just look at that from a Democratic Republic perspective with an electoral college, it makes a lot more sense to target identity politics where
Absolutely.
57.4% of the population is Caucasian, even though
You don't want to talk economics.
the vast majority of those people control almost no wealth. Well, that's what's interesting is that they do talk economics. They just talk fakeonomics.
Absolutely. It's a good one, David. That's good.
Thank you. I'm done now. Episode over. They talk about what their plan is to improve that life from the
Yeah.
context of the identity politics, but the same thing is coming out of the Democrat. Now, in this election cycle, the critical error made by the Democrats was to focus so much more on the opponent and the opponent only and not on the messaging. That was a big problem. But from a psychological perspective, I think a great book to read, even to this day, whether you like the guy or not, Jonathan Haidt, I think, is fairly,
I love Jonathan Knight. We need to get him on the show.
he's controversial, but The Righteous Mind, he wrote in 2012,
It's excellent.
it is excellent. And it also explains why Republicans have such an easier time speaking to their population because of
Absolutely.
the factors that come into play. Because from a individualistic standpoint,
Huh?
Republicans look at poverty as an individual problem. The issue comes down to you. Whereas from a Democratic perspective, poverty is a systemic issue. And
Yes.
it's not necessarily your fault that you're in that situation. The problem being that if you're in that situation and somebody tells you that it's not because of you, what that implies is there's nothing you can do about it, which isn't really true. But if somebody comes to you and says poverty is an individualistic problem, you're not hearing it as I'm being blamed for it. What you're hearing it as is I can do something about it and you're willing to help me.
You nailed it. Yeah, you totally nailed it. So Republicans tend to appeal to individualistic perspective, whereas the Democrats tend to appeal to this societal thing. And as it turns out, the Republican argument, which is individual, actually appeals more to most of us.
Yes.
I can fix this. I can do it myself. I have that option. Whereas the Democrats, they do tend to talk about societal issues, the big picture. Now, which one's right? Well, I'll tell you, it's a mix. No one is right. That it is societal and an individual
Yeah.
responsibility.
Well, and what's interesting, I think, is that when your viewpoint is from an individualistic perspective, you use that not as it's my fault. You use that as I can do something about it. Whereas if you hear it from a systemic perspective, all you're hearing is I can't do anything about it. And not well, it's not my fault. You're just hearing
I need to wait for the government to fix it.
I can't do anything about it. In all fairness, that book was written in 2012. It was pre
Yep,
Donald Trump. I
it
do think
was.
it projected his first win.
It did.
I think it needs to be updated because the Republican identity has shifted so much compared to what it was. The Republican Party today is vastly different than before. I think James Tallarico actually does present many more arguments that would kind of apply to what the old Republican Party was anyway, which I think is fascinating. So I would be interested to see Jonathan Haidt do a new book that kind of talks about that and the way that the Republican Party has shifted. I mean, at this point, with the way things are going, people would probably argue that Ronald Reagan is a Democrat in today's world compared to today's Republican Party.
No, at that moment in time, Ronald Reagan, interestingly enough, and this is the march of time, yes, for many, many years, he was identified as a Republican icon, the benchmark. But if we go backwards in time, I think he would have much more in common with today's Democratic Party than he would with today's Republican Party. And that's the shift of time. If we go back to 1980, and look at the platforms of the Democrats and the Republicans to now, one thing that I think would be struck by is the fact that the Republicans don't exist on a platform anymore. It is the ever changing whims of their leader. Whereas back then, the Republican platform wouldn't line up perfectly with the Democrats' perspective, but it would line up vastly more with today's Democrats than it would with today's Republicans.
Yeah. The strength of the Republican Party today is that because there's no platform to fall back on, there's no requirement to stay within it, right?
If there are no rules, it makes it easy.
If you just have to agree with one person
Yeah.
and then make arguments to support his currently held belief, which changes in a sentence, it is actually a lot easier as long as everybody's in line with that.
Well, it's not a sentence. It's a truth. If it changes within a truth. So, and you know what? I mean, psychologically, God, does that so frees them up? If we go backwards in time when there were platforms, and these are our policies, this is what we believe in. You created a certain cognitive dissonance when you stepped away from that. It pulled you back. It was the gravity that pulled you back. This is what we believe in. And one of the most freeing things that in today's Republican Party in particular is that they are free of any kind of gravity. They have no gravity.
You know what it is that there was a black and a white way of thinking in a platform. It had to be this way or it had to be this way. And to deviate from it, even in the consideration that maybe what you said wasn't 100% right, created a lot of anxiety. It created a lot of hardship within the party because you would be faced with raw data that showed what you were saying was not all black or was not all white. And yet you still had to defend it as if it was. It was the sole truth. Whereas a party that operates not on a set of principles that we can all agree with, but rather through the personality structure of somebody who very much lives in the gray, does free you up to never have to argue for something that was said yesterday. You don't have to make the argument that something that was proved wrong yesterday, today, or tomorrow is right because you're willing to shift to wherever the fuck you need to be for it to make sense now. It would be helpful if that was centered on ethics, values, morals, hell, even the Constitution, which it's not. It's
Mm-mm.
set on the whims of a personality. It strengthens the party in their ability to consolidate their viewpoints, whereas the Democrats are very much struggling from the fractured nature of where they live, which is different silos of belief, especially when some conflict. Whereas, as long as you are willing to ignore that humanistic drive to cement yourself, at least in a viewpoint, and you can now cement your viewpoint into just the faith in one. And that's where it's cemented rather than saying, I believe in the Constitution, because that's not what this is. Clearly, it's not what it is. The MAGA does not believe in the Constitution unless it benefits them. So the belief structure and the focus is only on, I believe that what he says is right.
Mhm.
Maybe I shouldn't point out, because I'm a gentleman, that that's what
Everybody, David, at his core, he's a gentleman.
I'm a gentleman, Robbie, so I'm not going to point out that that is how every cult has ever functioned,
Mhm.
in that the belief structure goes along with whatever the cult leader is saying, not evidence surrounding them. So I do think it's a really dangerous model, but it is profoundly, profoundly strong. If you were going to run a political party and all you wanted was for you to be successful in it, this is the strongest way to do it. I cannot think of a party that would be stronger than this, because this requires fealty and identity to be focused solely on one person and one person's belief structure. What I do wonder, Robbie, is like any great cult, once the leader is no longer the leader, they pass whatever, they ascend to the next
Ascend.
level, the cult typically dies
It does.
because you don't have that primary focus, and it's very difficult for somebody to take on that perspective.
Impossible.
Well, there's been I mean, with like the Hale-Bopp comet, that doomsday cult, they had two leaders. So one of them died and the other one was able to kind of take it on, but through communication with the other leader at the next level.
They have a followership of about what, 100?
Yeah, exactly. Now, that's the question though. So without Donald Trump anointing the next leader who can,
Which he won't. He won't. He can't.
what happens to that 30% of the Republican Party that has the 100% approval rating for him? What happens to those people when the leader, because he's almost 80, right? Like he's almost 80 years old. He's not going to live forever, I don't think. I don't think he'll live forever.
I can make a reasonable guess. No,
I would
no, he
assume that
won't.
he won't. Even modern
What
science isn't going to keep. But what happens to that 30% of people? They disillusioned and wandering around?
No,
Like,
from a treatment standpoint, and I often think of it in these terms, is that I definitely have individuals who come to me, and part of their problem, or the vast majority of their problem, is the fact that they don't have an ethos. They are not following a set of rules that they have established. Now, it's not my job to tell them what the rules of life are. It's not my job to tell them what their ethos should be, what is right, what is wrong. But those who are bound by a core ethos, a belief structure, this is right, this is wrong, they tend to do better than those who really, it fluctuates based on what feels good at the moment. When you fluctuate based on what feels good at the moment, that's the path of substance abuse. That's the path of addiction. That's the path of chaos. What we currently are looking at in the Republican Party, at least, is that a good number, 30%, solid 30%, are comfortable with the fact that they don't necessarily have an ethos. They fluctuate with what feels good. Eventually, those chickens come home to roost. That's a problem that they will eventually have to sit with at some point, at some time. And yes, when I play this out in the next decade, that issue is going to be significant. They will be a party that has so deviated from a platform, from a policy, from a belief structure, to the point of being, what is it that this leader wants at this moment? What feels good to them? That actually, it feels good. It feels good if you're that 30%. It actually feels good to just flow with whatever, because you're not held, you're not bound.
you can't be wrong. I think that's the key from your perspective is if all you need to believe is right is whatever this person says.
Yeah, today we're anti-war, we're the peace president. Tomorrow we're at war.
And we're still the peace president. Awarded.
Right,
We've
because
got
because
awards. We got a Nobel Peace Prize without our name on it. That's true
it's on my
peace.
wall. I own that.
You got a FIFA statue.
Yeah.
I mean, they are the, I think,
It's
premier
ridiculous.
source of
It's so
identifying
silly.
peace
Oh my
prizes
god.
is FIFA. I always think about what FIFA will do when I think about who should get a peace prize.
They're gonna come up with another award that gives him, like, you're the war president.
The best at it, though,
Yeah.
when all you need to be right is to say whatever he says,
Mhm.
and there's no deviation from that, you're good. But that is a really safe way to resolve anxiety that you might otherwise have because there's conflict when you say, I really like this person as a leader, but I don't agree with them all the time, which will happen.
Well, it has to catch up at some point because, I mean, and this is, again, this is taking the body politic and pulling it back to the human. Fundamentally, politics work best when it actually flows with our own psychodynamics and our own existence as humans. There is no human that can, with straight face, and tell me that when they are flowing with whatever the desires of the moment are, that they end up feeling good about themselves. That what makes us feel good about ourselves is when we have purpose and we have an ethos, a set of rules, and then we live by them. And yeah, sometimes we have to adjust. Sometimes we set those rules, too restrictively or they're not restrictive enough, and we have to adjust. But we feel best as people, as individuals, when we are doing the things that fit with our core priorities. And right now, the administration, as we are, I don't know what their priorities are. Every day it changes. Every day something adjusts. It is different. It is unsettling. It feels pretty good because it's kind of like what it is when you're like 3 or 4, when it's like, I want ice cream. I love you this much. I love you zero. There's a certain freedom to that, but it's not an adult perspective.
And you'll see kids go through that struggle with their parents as they try to find their own identity. But these are adult humans who have already found their identity, but they found their identity in that belief structure. It would be much easier for all of us if we just went through our lives assuming that everything that our parents did was amazing, right? Like this goes back to psychology. When you're little, you just think that everything they do is right, everything they say is amazing. It's a real struggle when you start to gain your own identity and you start to see like, oh shit, grandpa's racist. Oh, he's really racist, but I didn't realize that till I was 25. He used to say that shit all the time when I was young. I thought it was hilarious.
I really liked him.
That's the growing up and figuring out who you are. Now, it is fascinating when you do that and then latch onto a new part of that. But and I think with the numbers, it means that like 23 million people are going to be very, very lost at the end of all of this. The good news is I think that's less than 10% of the population. So that's probably, going to be a lot more work for you and I. Yeah, it'll be a big deal. Anyway, I think we've talked this to death. We meant to talk about 3 things. We talked about 1. It got interesting. Oh, well, great. Do you have a prescription that came out of this, Robbie?
I guess maybe this is my thing. I don't know if it's a prescription, but, I think we all do need to make an effort at not just thinking nationally, but we also have to have a perspective on the individual, that the individual counts. And in fact, they count more. They count more because fundamentally, the national perspective is one thing. But if we're not really dialed in to what the existence of the individual is, we're going to miss it. So it's easy to set back and say that all the folks that follow Donald Trump are dumb, but they're not. It's not the reality. The reality is that they really are just struggling to survive and take care of their kids and feel good about themselves and feel like they're achieving their job as a mom or a dad or a partner. So we've got to step back and think in those terms rather than sort of the logic that often guides folks who are thinking in terms of, big level politics.
That's the area where people can help themselves a bit more, is the difference between the identity versus the systemic issue.
Nicely framed.
My prescription is that if you are finding yourself going through Erickson's stage 5, which is identity versus role confusion, for a second time in your life, where you're trying to latch on to a consolidating perspective, a great thing where you can just agree with it and lazily sit with it. And I'm going to say lazily because if your belief structure is such that you say, whatever it is that I believe is infallible and can do no wrong, whether that's a person, whether that's the Constitution, if you can't look at something and see it for the fact that it is indeed imperfect, try again, my friend. Work a little bit harder in your belief structure to realize that nothing is perfect in this realm that we call Earth, except for Jessica Foster. She is perfect.
We're in agreement with Jessica Foster. She's perfect. And she's also AI generated.
She's not real.
I don't think she is.
God damn it. All right. Well, I got to go get on the socials, make some changes, delete some stuff. So thank you so much for everybody sticking around, listening to us. All the hate mail that you have towards Robbie, go ahead and send it towards Robbie and not me.
Yeah, yeah. Send it directly to me.
Thanks, everyone. Hit like, subscribe, share with your friends. We appreciate you.
All 10 of you.
All tens of you. Till next time. We'll cue up that music and we are out.